and welcome to episode 2 of All About That Reef.
This episode, we'll be diving into the exciting world of shipwrecks, and we have a really cool guest joining us. But before we get into that, Ainri, I've never really dived in Sri Lanka, so you're the expert on this matter for now. Can you tell us a little bit more about what tech diving is, what wreck diving is, and all the different aspects associated with diving?
Yeah, so technical diving is basically where you dive deeper than 30 meters. So it's a different certification altogether. And as you know, as a diver, there's different certification levels that you can get. So technical diving is not recreational diving. So after 30 meters, if you're diving after 30 meters, it's called technical diving. And I actually got my technical diving license last year, and I dived the HMS Hermes shipwreck. So wreck diving is part of technical diving because you dive to those depths, because most wrecks, I mean not all wrecks, but most wrecks are at very deep,
Deeper waters.
in deeper waters, except for like some wrecks that are at shorter, at shallower depths. But yeah, that's what wreck diving is, and shipwrecks as a whole is an interesting part of like diving because there's so much of history. So like a reef, there is, I mean, a lot of coral reefs and species like fish species and different creatures, but shipwrecks not only bring and create an ecosystem for all of these creatures, it basically has so much of history from the time the vessel was originated and where it was originated and which year it was like built and which year it sank.
Why it sank.
Yeah, so it's quite interesting. I think wreck diving is very interesting, specifically in Sri Lanka as well, because not many people know this, but there's at least 25, if I'm not mistaken. We can ask the host that, the guest that. I'm not too sure. I think it's about 25, if I'm not mistaken, wrecks in Colombo itself. And when I tell people how I dive in Colombo, they are like, where are there dive sites in Colombo? But yeah, we'll get back into that later on.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I mean, even I didn't know that there were that many shipwrecks off of the coast of Colombo. I knew there were shipwrecks all around Sri Lanka, but I didn't realize there were that many in Colombo itself.
Yeah. So I think, if I'm not mistaken, you told me you've never dived in Sri Lanka. Is there a particular reason?
Yeah, sadly, one of my uncles, he passed away a few years ago while he was doing a dive in Sri Lanka. Interestingly, he was diving the Hermes, which is what you just mentioned, and sort of, having this family experience, I think, really left a mark on all of us. So it's been something that I personally have been a little bit afraid of doing, and I think obviously it's something that my family has also not been, I mean, it's not that they've been discouraging, but I think they also have a little bit of that fear. And in the last episode, I was telling you about how marine biology was never sort of on my radar, and I think that's one of the reasons is I never really considered that you could do marine biology without diving.
Yeah.
So that kind of fear has always been there. I have done diving. I did my certification while I was studying in Abu Dhabi, and like it was an incredible experience, and I absolutely loved it. But I think in Sri Lanka it has that sort of emotional sentiment and that fear attached to it. So it's just something that I've avoided so far.
I'm glad you actually brought this story up, and I'm so sorry to hear about your uncle. But it's important for people to understand the safety and how risky of a sport or hobby it is.
Yeah.
I mean, it also depends a lot on your body, and you need to know your body to a certain extent when you go to those depths, because it's after all just you and like your tank that you're
Also I think when you think about the ocean, it's such a three-dimensional space, right? You're practically entering a completely different world almost, and sort of knowing that comes with its own dangers is, I think, a very important step if you're ever going to consider diving as well, is to sort of take it seriously and realize that it does have dangers and risks associated with it, even though it is like a fun and exciting activity. Like
Definitely.
it has
You're
the
so
flip
right.
side to it as well.
Yeah.
So to not leave things so bleak, shipwrecks are actually, I think to me, I think they're really fascinating, even though I'm yet to dive one and see one. And it's because, like, from my understanding of like simple marine biology, is that when you think of the seafloor, like sometimes it's really hard for like species to settle there. So what shipwrecks do is they act as artificial reefs, right? They provide three-dimensionality to the seafloor, which means that later onwards, when coral larvae are spreading through the ocean currents, they have something to settle on. Fish have like places to make homes in, they have places to hide from predators. And then when the small fish come, there's food for the larger fish, so then it starts attracting the larger fish.
Yeah.
And then on its own, it becomes
An entire ecosystem.
exactly
On its own.
an entire like ecosystem of its own. And like sometimes it's even more unique from like the ecosystems that are found nearby to it. So it's like, along with the history aspect that you were talking about, it's also like really important areas of biodiversity. And
Yeah, I'm glad you actually brought that up, because even when you dive, you see this like amazing life underwater, and schools of fish. And even if you do like a night dive, you see all these nocturnal creatures that come out. And also to mention how governments or countries do this purposely, where they actually they sink like buses, or I think they have sunk a bus in Trincomalee area and create this like artificial reef, and they even like sink statues. They create like a underwater museum,
museums, yeah.
which also brings in a lot of fish to this area and to this like dives.
Yeah. Also, I think with artificial reefs, also from what my understanding is, when it's sort of done closer to the reef, not saying that these shipwrecks are close to the reef or they should be deployed close to the close to the shore. Sorry, when they're closer to the shore, they also help prevent coastal erosion because they act as like a buffer
Of
against
course, yeah.
sort of like wave action and things like that. So there are also a lot more like underlying factors that it influences that sometimes I think we don't even think about or
Yeah.
consider. So it's really cool that these accidental incidents, most times, while they can be negative initially, over time can lead to
Create
sort of
an
a
entire ecosystem and boost the economy from like a tourism perspective as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we should end our conversation here and
So that we have some content left for our guests to
Definitely.
talk about.
and bring our guest on board. Shout out to Pass It On for sponsoring this episode.
And now we're back. So today we're really lucky to have a very cool guest joining us on this show. He's one of Sri Lanka's first tech divers, and he's also Sri Lanka's only cave diver. But today we'll mostly be talking to him about his incredible work exploring Sri Lanka shipwrecks.
So Dharshana, thank you for joining us today.
Most
And,
welcome.
we want to understand how you got into like exploring shipwrecks. I think you once mentioned it to me how fishermen used to call you and tell you that there was a potential shipwreck around the area, and then how you like went and like explored it with them. So tell us a bit about it.
Yeah, well, I think it's almost like everyone, like even you, when you started diving, you just, what did you want to do? You wanted to dive, right? Just,
Yeah.
So it's really, I had no intention of exploring shipwrecks when I dived, and it is something that when you keep doing it, you just keep getting into.
Yeah.
So my initial dives were just to be underwater and to look at all the beautiful fish and relax and kind of exciting. And obviously there were shipwrecks. So I dived, I think my first shipwreck was in Hikkadua, the conch. But at that point I wasn't interested in shipwrecks. I was looking at the fish. I was just enjoying being underwater,
Yeah.
right? Because I actually had some, I would say, negative experiences when I tried to get into diving because I couldn't swim. So I was very glad just to be underwater.
Yeah.
And then when I saw, one day I was diving a shipwreck on my own, which was a deep shipwreck, and a question popped up: where did this shipwreck come from? So that's the point where I think I became an explorer, trying to figure out what happened.
Interesting.
That's really cool, and I mean, being on the water in itself is like an incredible feeling, right?
I think all of us are divers, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, somewhat. And also, shipwrecks are also really important sort of sites of marine ecosystems, right? Like from my basic knowledge, I understand that they provide refuge to a lot of different species. Could you talk to us a little bit about, shipwreck ecology, shipwreck biodiversity, and sort of even maybe the species that you witnessed to some incredible sightings you've had?
Yeah, sure. So I think it's a bit of a complicated thing. So when a shipwreck starts sinking, it's not necessarily a good thing for the environment, right? Express Pearl and other ships. So at that point, there's a pollution event. So anyway, let's say we can't control it and it just sinks into the bottom of the ocean. Now, once it's left there for let's say 4 to 5 years or a decade or more, then I think it's diminishing returns in terms of the impact on nature and the biodiversity, because then it's become a home for the fish. So it's like destroying someone's home and trying to get metal out. So I think if a shipwreck has to be salvaged, it should be done as soon as it sank or stop it from sinking, because that sinking event is polluting. It's not good for the ocean. So shipwreck sinking is not good, even though we love
It's nice to
shipwrecks
explore.
underwater, but
Yeah.
sinking is not a good thing. So what happens is, as soon as a shipwreck sinks and after it settles, corals start settling in, small fish come and hide the other juveniles, and the big fish come looking for food. So it becomes a small city, and in about 5 to 10 to 15 years, it's amazing. The transformation can be quite amazing. So you know about it, you've seen it to your own eyes. And so from very small species like nudibranchs or small fish to big pelagic fish, right? It's a amazing place to be. And the thing about Sri Lanka is, very strangely, Sri Lanka, I think it stands out in terms of shipwrecks and the biodiversity that you find on shipwrecks compared to reefs, right? I mean, if you take any reef in Sri Lanka, do you think that there's anything that's better than the best shipwreck in your experience?
The new reef in Colombo
Yakumpita Reef. Yeah, that's quite
it's new, and there's a lot of table corals and a lot of life there. But when you look at it from a perspective of like a shipwreck, the number of species are definitely a lot more in the reef. But when it comes to the wreck, it's different. It's always the ecosystem is way different to what we see in a reef. But the schools of fish that you get in a ship, like at a shipwreck site, is
especially the deep shipwrecks, right? So if you go to like the Hermes or anything below 50, it's amazing. It's like going to a different world.
Yeah.
And experiencing different life forms.
Yeah. So we have about 25 shipwrecks in Colombo, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
And what's the reason as to why we have this many shipwrecks, and can you explain to everyone why we have this many shipwrecks just even in Colombo or around the island?
Yeah, so if you take Sri Lanka, right, it's kind of obstruction for shipping. If you take the Indian Ocean, ships from the east going to the west and vice versa have to go around Sri Lanka. So it's a bother really. So what's happened is there's a density of ships going around, and Colombo is a port, has been a port for the longest time. So there are ships have been going into Colombo and back and forth for a long time. So
for how long?
As good question actually. I'm not really sure.
90s.
But I'm also my understanding is also there's a lot of World War wrecks, right?
Sri
Lanka, so
they're all quite old, right? All the wrecks. I think Godava is the oldest one.
2000 plus years, 2000 give or take.
Yeah.
So Sri Lanka has been a busy. Gaul, then Colombo has been quite busy, and at least in Colombo, the oldest shipwreck I found, I think, is 1800s, if I remember correctly, 1800s. So 150, 160 years old. Yeah. And obviously, so that's why I say I have a saying: where there are ships, there will be wrecks. Right? Wherever there's a ship, there will be a wreck. And in Colombo, you have the out anchorage. So a lot of accidents happen, weather related, lack of maintenance, or fires, all sorts of reasons. right? So ships sink, and there's a huge density of ships. So for me, Colombo is the shipwreck capital of South Asia.
And not many people know that.
Not many, I mean, people now, I think more and more people know about it,
Yeah.
but it's like, for me, it was a shock to find out that I lived in Colombo. I used to go to Hikkadua, Bentota and all those places
dive.
those days, right? So when I started diving in Colombo almost 20 years ago, it was almost like, why do I have to go anywhere else?
Yeah.
There's so many things there.
People are still surprised, like when I say I dive in Colombo, they're just like yeah, like why, how, like
Because also the coral reefs around Colombo aren't very well discovered or explored.
Yeah,
right?
there's so
people don't
much.
really know. But also, I guess, like talking about how much shipping there is happening around
Yeah.
Sri Lanka, that's not necessarily a positive thing, right? When you really think about it, because like ship traffic is also sort of
Harmful.
really detrimental to like
Yeah,
marine
yeah.
mammals and also sort of just the amount
It's
of
not,
pollution
it's
that
not good.
comes
So
from it. It's not
it's
necessarily-
and so in my lifetime, 3 ships have sunk, with the Faru, Thermopylae Sierra, and the Express Pearl. And of course, in the East Coast, there have been a couple of wreck sinking. So like you said, so once I started figuring out there are shipwrecks, so I make friends with the boatmen. Right? I go with the fishing boats, and initially they were a bit suspicious about why this guy, why is he diving? What's the reason for diving? And then they realized that I'm doing it because I want to discover, I want to explore. They became friends with me, and then whenever they get to know that there's a shipwreck somewhere, they tell me that there's a shipwreck, or they give me locations. So what I do is I use a small sonar and I go around scanning the seabed, and sometimes out of 10 hits, 1 is a shipwreck. Others either there's nothing there, or it's a small rubble reef, or it's a reef. So they also don't know what it is sometimes.
yeah.
So it's a lot of I would say hit and miss in exploration. You don't know what you are getting into, how deep it is, what sort of shipwreck it is.
And if I'm not mistaken, you also got involved in exploring vampire as well, right? Or,
No, vampire is a mystery.
but
Vamp-
did you, at any
I-
point when they came to like explore it, did you get involved?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
Okay.
So the vampire is Australian.
yeah.
You know the vampire,
Missing
not the
context.
bat vampires.
I was
So-
a little confused.
Yeah. So during World War II, April 5th, the Japanese Navy attacked Colombo, right? And there were several shipwrecks sunk mostly in the harbor. April 9th, they attacked the east coast, and they wanted to destroy all the fleet, the Admiralty fleet. So several ships were sunk on the same day. Started with the Hermes, and Hermes had an escort called HMAS Vampire, Her Majesty's Australian Service. It was an Australian warship that sank, and then the British Sergeant, the Hollyhock, the Athelstane, the Salvaging in Trincomalee. So we have actually a whole portfolio of World War II wrecks in the East Coast. We have found all of them except the vampire. Vampire is completely missing, and so it's a big mystery, right? And so in 2018 or 19, the Australian Navy mounted expedition to do deep sonar scans.
And they still couldn't find it.
Nothing.
Yeah, so I met them and I said I have looked for it and I've explored, and I gave them areas like saying, okay, look into this, but be prepared to have really deep scans, because there's an undersea canyon that comes to Batticaloa. So if you look at the map,
continental
yeah,
shelf,
the
like
continental
where
shelf, there's one of, there's one of Panadura.
Really?
Yeah, there's one of Panadura.
And it drops down to how?
It drops down quite deep.
Really?
Yeah. So I've been actually doing sonar scans in that area and trying to
Okay.
figure out whether there are like nice places to dive, but it's too deep, like 80, 90, 120
Yeah,
meters, and it's 25, 30 kilometers away.
Mm.
Whereas the Batticaloa Canyon comes quite close to shore.
Yeah.
So about 1 kilometer, or is 1 mile, 1 mile off where the Hermes, so the last known position of the vampire when it sank was about 1 to 5 miles off the Hermes. In that same area, we have this massive undersea canyon. So I believe it's in there.
Somewhere
It's
there.
in there in a massive mountainous region. Same way MH370 is missing.
Yeah.
It's because those areas are massive mountains. It's
Yeah.
undersea mountains. It's like crazy. It's very complex, right? So
Yeah.
it's a big mystery, and it's not found to this date.
And I think they found the positioning of vampire with those pictures that were taken at the last, as soon as
Yes,
while it was
yes,
sinking,
yes,
this
while-
guy, he was the photographer for the he was on the vessel while
Oh,
it was
okay.
sinking.
Damn.
And he took these like about 10 or 15 pictures
Yes.
while it was sinking. And those are the pictures that,
No, actually, so you're right.
The
There
pictures
was
survived.
yeah. And
no,
he,
that's a different story.
Oh,
So
okay.
on the Hermes was an official Navy war photographer, Charles
Yeah.
Morgan. His job was to take pictures. So whatever the situation, his job was to take pictures. So when the Hermes was bombed, 40 bombs, direct hits, right? So the Japanese they hid behind the rising sun and dive bombed the Hermes. 40 bombs, all 40 hit the Hermes. Within 10 minutes, started to sink. So this guy started taking pictures, and he managed to survive. And he took those pictures and survive. So those pictures are in this book called Hermes Adventure. Do you have a copy of that?
yeah, no, I don't.
You
My
should try and
uncle
get.
has
You,
one.
you
Yeah.
should steal it from him. So,
I read it though,
so in 2006, another Australian company called Prospero, they came to look for the Hermes, and they also did side scan sonar. So what they did was they actually took the photographs taken by the Japanese pilot
Oh.
who bombed the Hermes. I mean, one of the Japanese or few of the Japanese pilots. So they bomb and they take pictures. I don't know how they didn't. Probably they didn't have
Traumatic.
phones or anything like that.
I mean,
I
you
don't
probably need to like prove something. You know,
Yeah.
it was a long time ago. So
Yeah, you know, it's quite strange. Even they had cameras on those planes. Like, I mean, we have these phones, right? But I'm like, how big can those be? Like
Yeah.
those 1942
And the
cameras.
tiny planes as well.
Yeah. So they use those pictures to extrapolate where the Hermes, the vampire could have been in relation to the Hermes, roughly. And there were eyewitness accounts in Hermes. So what I did was I actually went through all the eyewitness accounts and also used that to as a guideline to give it to the Australian Navy, saying that based on these things, it could have been here. But it's one of the big mysteries in Sri Lanka, wreck mysteries, shipwreck mysteries.
like the Blackbeard and all of that, like we have our own little
Yeah,
mystery.
mystery, yeah.
Yeah.
Or our MH370, we can't
Yeah.
compare it, but you know, it's a mystery nevertheless.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Interesting.
it obviously seems like you have a lot of experience and you've been doing this for a really long time. So just to like understand a little bit over the years that you've been diving, have you seen impact of human activity or just any sort of human anthropogenic impact on the shipwrecks and maybe the surrounding ecosystems?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's there were points where I was so depressed as well. I stopped diving, I think, for almost 6 months.
He's constantly retiring from diving and then he comes back.
Yeah, I can't keep out. So I think I've seen three kinds of impact. So one is when I dived 20 years ago, there are a lot more fish in the ocean. So you know, this place they accompany to the new reef, Gigitipita, or we call it Taprobane East and Taprobane West, right? So those areas were almost exotic places we used to go to. Massive schools of fish, like 400. Once I saw 400 batfish. Like
Really?
well, I don't know how it's 400. I think it's you can't count all the
Similar,
fish, right?
yeah.
But
Yeah,
Massive
approximately.
amount.
yeah, approximately like hundreds of batfish, surgeon fish. So it was one of those places we used to. It's about 1.5 hour boat ride, and those days the boats are like really slow and 15 bhp brake horsepower boats, right? But it was almost an adventure to go there, and it was lovely. But now when I go there, it's
Reduced.
sometimes there's nothing. So
Yeah.
oceans are fished out, right? That's one thing.
Yeah.
Second thing is the shipwrecks, they deteriorate. So partly it's not human, partly it's because of the sun, the wave action, oxygen, all that, right? But like one of my, I think, so two wrecks that made me really sad is the Taprobane East wreck.
Yeah.
It used to be beautiful. It was massive. It was. So now there's almost nothing there.
Yeah.
So one theory is that all the ship anchoring, they are big anchors. They go and
Damage.
slam against the shipwreck and just obliterate it. And Black Coral Wreck, have you done the
Yeah.
Black Coral Wreck? It's 40 meters. It used to be this big ship-looking wreck,
And intact.
intact.
Yeah.
And now when I dived in 2022, where is this? I thought I had gone to a wrong wreck.
Really?
So I thought I had put the GPS wrong, and I'm in a wrong. Then I realized no, this is the wreck. And I was heart sank.
Yeah.
So sad. But yeah, so deterioration of the wreck. So commercial shipping will cause anchor break damage. Then in the east, dynamite fishing destroys the coral, like the British Sergeant, one of the World War II shipwrecks. The corals outside, I saw them destroyed because of dynamite fishing. Yeah, so human impact. And the tons of
Salvage.
plastic. Have you seen the
Yeah.
Kalani River discharge polythene and plastic? Have you seen those?
Yeah, it's a lot.
It's a river. Once I went out, it was a river of mud going out, and there were fans,
TVs.
TVs,
Is
right?
this at the delta?
Yes,
It's
just
the
out of the
river mouth.
river mouth.
Okay.
Yeah, so massive amount of plastic is being discharged into the ocean, and it comes back into our beaches. So I think this Clean Sri Lanka conceptually, it's a very good program, but I think until you address the root cause of reducing the use of plastic and polythene, reuse and recycling, however much cleaning, it's not going to solve it.
And educating the public,
Educating
right,
the
and bringing
public, yeah.
awareness to all of this is also very important.
But also like policy and legislation to sort of make sure that
Yeah.
things are.
And I think I don't know whether you know anything about it, as a nation, we don't have a proper recycling program yet,
Like
right?
a like
I
a
mean-
regulation.
Like material recycling
Like
facilities.
yeah,
right?
I mean at a national level, I think there's one in Kerala that's does some
Like a incineration plant.
incineration. But for example, out of Colombo, the amount of garbage that because people have nowhere to put their garbage, it just goes into landfills or just thrown out on the road and goes to the rivers and taken to the ocean. And then, so in some of the deep shipwrecks, I'm starting to find all sorts of products.
And these are deep, so they would be
Deep.
like how many meters underwater?
40 meters, 50 meters, 60 meters.
Yeah, I guess what people realize is you don't actually have to go there to litter because the
Yeah.
the water currents, the sort of
Currents, yeah,
environmental factors
currents.
also taking play and send out this sort of waste everywhere into the ocean, right?
Also, Sierra had this issue where they were about to use it to salvage metal, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Has that stopped now, or is it still
It's,
ongoing? Is that case?
there was an effort to salvage Sierra. It was partly, I think, the owners. So there were the cargo owners and the owners of the ship. They were kind of well within their rights to salvage. I think at least the cargo. I think the intention was with the cargo owners to take the cargo or the pipes or whatever. But on top of it, I think the government wanted to salvage the wreck itself. So I mean, we wrote to the government, we wrote to the president. So nothing seems to be happening right now. So fortunately, it will be there.
And also, it doesn't make sense to salvage from it now, right? Because it has already like deteriorated to a certain
Yeah,
extent.
yeah. It doesn't make sense economically to salvage only the wreck or only the cargo, unless they salvage both. But I don't think they will do it now. I feel it's settled. I don't know. You never know. Someone comes up with the idea of.
Yeah.
Hopefully not.
And-
Because it's one of the closest wrecks, and
And it's
it's-
pretty shallow, right? 'Cause
yeah.
it's like
Yeah, yeah.
10
because
meters?
most wrecks in Colombo are quite deep, and this is a very shallow wreck. It's at, I mean, from like 5 meters you can see the wreck.
Exactly.
So it's a good place to even like take beginners out diving.
Discovery.
Yeah.
And it's vital to the economy of the marine dive tourism in Colombo, because all the dive centers use that as a platform to train divers.
Exactly.
Because it's so shallow, right? I mean, it's virtually 0 meters. The shipwreck is sticking out of the
Yeah.
ocean. So it's a wonderful place, and
Yeah.
it'll be shame if that's removed. And then
Exactly.
there are jet skiers who come to see it. There are
Yeah.
anglers who fish there. So
It's
a
a
lot of
really
activity.
nice spot. And if you're really lucky, you see whale sharks there
Yes, I've seen one close by, but not
Really?
on Sierra.
at Medafaru.
I've seen at Medafaru and at Cargo
Wow.
or Pisho Breton. Yeah.
But so sort of like you were just talking about how important, like how like amazing these are, and also about like possible attempts to salvage it previously. So do you know if there's like any efforts right now in Sri Lanka that are being taken to maybe protect these shipwrecks, like provide legal protection or sort of like advocacy or any sort of
Yeah,
those kind of
so-
aspects that you can tell us about?
To some extent, I wouldn't say fully. I think I would recognize one effort is the law in Sri Lanka. There's a law, archaeological law, which protects
Antiquities.
ancient shipwrecks. Anything older than there are some interpretation issues with the law, but some people say 100 years, but some people say any wreck that's older than 134.
Okay.
So I think it's 100 years. I haven't seen it. It's 1830. Anything older than 1830 is
Okay.
what I understand. I might be wrong. So there is then there is the National Shipwreck Database effort, which I was also part of, which was initiated by the Maritime Archaeological Unit, which is a great project. And the idea is to share knowledge within government organizations. So right now everyone is working in silos, right?
Yeah.
So that's a common thing in Sri Lanka, unfortunately. And the idea here is that you have a national shipwreck database which can be accessed by all the policy-making government agencies like the wildlife, the archaeology department, the navy. So they know exactly where the shipwrecks are. They know if someone is salvaging it. You know, all sorts of things can be done, right? So now we have a actually pretty good database of shipwrecks, which includes biodiversity information. So
Oh, okay. That's
the
really good, I think.
idea is to give access to marine biologists so that they can upload information
Yeah.
separately. So it's like a how do you say, crowdsourcing, or
Yes.
everyone
Like a
is
network.
It's like citizen science.
yeah, citizen
Almost,
science
but for
almost.
Yeah, that's really cool actually, because I think one of the biggest problems I have faced in the really short time that I've done research in Sri Lanka is the fact that there's so many data gaps and everything is so data deficient, and even when the data is there, nobody's sharing the data, or the data is not available online, or like
Yeah.
you have to sit for hours at different government institutions to get the data. And also something somewhat funny that I remembered is actually, I think somebody mentioned that under the antiquities law, shipwrecks in Sri Lanka are protected, but that doesn't mean the corals that are growing on the
Yes.
shipwrecks itself are protected.
Yes.
Which
Yes.
means you can damage the corals as long as
Yes.
you're not damaging
Damaging
the
the
shipwrecks
shipwreck.
itself, which is a little bit ironic
Yeah.
to me. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes. So shipwreck salvage happens once in a while, especially the shallower shipwrecks. The deeper shipwrecks are relatively safe because it's very hard to dive deep and to break off the metal. People end up getting bends. So people try and they end up getting bends or deep decompression sickness, and they can't do it again, right? So there's a kind of natural defense against deep shipwrecks being salvaged. However, the shallow shipwrecks are targets, especially the ones at 6 meters, like the graveyard in Batiklu,
Yeah.
or the Panadura Justicia shipwreck,
Yeah.
very shallow, 10 meters, very easy, right? So people take off stuff. Even Sierra, I think, is someone is
Yeah.
slowly. I mean, it's
It
not
happened
a
even last year.
yeah, it's not a organized effort, but random taking small pieces and selling off metal, copper, stuff like that. So it's hard to stop because we don't have the capacity to regulate everything in the ocean. I think the only way you can slow this down is to encourage tourism, so that more and more people are in the ocean and they witness any crime that's happening
Yeah.
in the ocean. That's the only way, because it's too large for any government agency to monitor.
It's true. Another question that we had was, so while you were exploring these wrecks or discovering them for the first time, there's obviously like a risk to it. I mean, of course, you might be doing it alone because a fisherman would call you and say, okay, there's this potential place. And is there any like memorable or an experience that you had while exploring these wrecks? And I know how you like discover the bells of, you have discovered not most of, but like a few of the
World War One ships,
Ships,
two World
yeah.
War One ships. Yeah.
So like, can you tell us a bit about your experience while exploring it for the first time?
Exploring a shipwreck for the first time.
Yeah.
First and foremost, I would say, one of my most exciting experiences, because you don't know what you're diving. Like, for example, the Worcestershire, which is a World War One shipwreck, and took me about 2 years to find the location, to get it from fishermen, because they also closely guard their shipwrecks, because those are fishing.
That's where they fish.
That's
Yeah.
where they fish. Yeah, so they don't want to give it up because they think, okay,
Yeah.
someone from Nigambu will come and start fishing now, so they don't want to
Yeah.
give it to anyone. They are very protective.
Yeah.
So it takes a bit to convince him to give it. So when I first dived the Worcestershire,
They must be having a lot of trust in you.
yeah. They know that I am not there for anything else, right? So
Yeah.
they, after a while, they become, when you become friends with them, they go out of the way to help. So very nice people,
Yeah.
right? So Worcestershire was a massive mystery, massive shipwreck at 57 meters, and I still remember the first dive I did when I was going down this massive shipwreck, like unraveling in front of me, and amazing amounts of trevally and big groupers and fish and barracuda. So it's like going into a wilderness and you're on your own. So it's a very surreal experience. So all these dives were tech dives, and actually one of the reasons I had to dive alone was the fact that these were deep dives, and I had done my technical diving qualifications, and there was no one in Sri Lanka at that time. Now I think there's quite a bit of a dozen of divers who have done their technical qualifications. So I couldn't go with anyone. So I either had the choice of not doing anything or going on my own. So guess what?
But you like going on your own as well.
Yeah, but you know what? I actually do. Because I can focus about myself only. I don't have to worry about my body. Is the person out of is he having a problem? I do checks. I just make my plan. I go on my own. I spend my time, and I spend about 2 hours. So most of the dives to the Worcestershire were about 25 to half an hour, and that required about 1.5 hours of decompression. So that whole thing was done alone. And sometimes once I went down, I came up, the boatman was wet, like completely wet, and there was water in the boat. So I asked, what happened? A storm passed by. And I had no indication. I had no indication. So he had got completely drenched. And what happened to you?
I mean, nice of him to wait for you.
He has to.
He has to.
Actually, that's one of the key things. Like the boatman is your survival line. If you don't, the boatman is not there, then you are in a bit of a fix.
So have you like lost your way while exploring these wrecks? Obviously, you go inside and even to find these bills, like you have to like properly explore these wrecks, not just like go around them. So have you experienced anything?
Yes, well, a lot of times it's so going inside shipwrecks is extremely dangerous. So that's something if you are not trained to penetrate shipwrecks or
and it's a
caves,
different course you have to do.
It's a different. So that's where the technical diving comes in. So open water diving is where if you have an emergency, you can come up to the surface. There's no barrier, right? Technical diving is if you are in a decompression obligation, and if you have to come up to the surface because there's a problem, you can't come up because you have a decompression stop. And if you don't spend time there and release the nitrogen of your
body,
your cardiovascular system, then if you surface, you get bubbles in your bloodstream, and you get at best you might get paralyzed, at worst you die, right? So those are barriers. So when you are doing any dive that has a barrier for you to come up, those are called technical dives. So there can be cave diving or deep diving with decompression. So for that you have to prepare, like do a lot of training, you have to have multiple tanks. So when I dived the Worcestershire, I used to carry 4 or 5 tanks. So I actually carried my buddy because I took about 40% more air than needed because there was no one to help me, right? So if I ran out of air, I had to have. So once I was removing the anchor, when the anchor got released and I got stuck, the anchor came and there's a current, and I got stuck in the ship. And so it took time to dislodge, and by the time I dislodged it, I just spent 5 minutes to dislodge that. It added half an hour of decompression. So fortunately I had air. I had my buddy around. So things like that, right? So it's so solo diving is not encouraged if you are. So it's like this. It's called being a self-sufficient diver. Self-sufficient diver is if you are diving alone, you have to be self-sufficient. You should have a backup air, you should have cutting devices, you should have signaling devices, you should have lights. So a lot more equipment, right? If you are just diving with a group and you decide to wander off on your own, that's dangerous. You should be within someone who can give you a lifeline.
Just note to everyone, we're not encouraging any solo diving or any sort of dangerous incidents like this.
I think once you told me the story about how you were exploring this wreck, I can't remember which one, and then you couldn't find your way out, and how you had to take your BCD off and come out through this like really like narrow space.
Yes.
Which ship?
Yeah, that's a cargo wreck. Shipwrecks. That's was on my 700th dive.
Oh wow!
Memorable dive, and I was doing a stupid thing. So that's why I guess anyone should learn from my stupidity, right? So I wasn't trained in cave diving or going into overhead environments. So I just went in with just one tank, and I have been progressively going in this. There's this small doorway. So I've been going like every time I dive there, I just go a little bit more. The next time I go a little bit more. Then I go down. So I was kind of familiar. So that's a good technique, progressive penetration, right? So I went like this, went down, and as I went in on this date, there was a like a debris field. Everything had fallen in. It was a doorway. So I looked at it, looked a bit tight. I said, I'm going to go. So I went in, and I managed to go in through, and then I came to this compartment or a room, and it was there was no way to go out. It was just there was like a small hole. So I turned back because I couldn't go out the same, right? I turned back, and when I went back in, so this is one of the problems with the shipwreck. There's a lot of silt, settled mud or what, I don't know what's, it's all just, I think particles in the water, it settles down, right? So you get like a couple of inches. Yeah. So by the time I went back to that place, there the debris field has collapsed. I couldn't see anything. It was like the coffee, like brown. So I was inside that, and I couldn't find my way out. So I was going in circles, and it was a very small. So imagine something this high, and you are inside this, and you are feeling your way around, right? So, and all because I was using wrong techniques. I didn't have a line. I was having a lot of entanglement hazards, like stuff were getting entangled, right? And then I could feel the panic now rising from my panic comes from here, right? It's sickening feeling, right? I don't want to be here. I want to get out. So but I went back to my basics. Stop, breathe, think, act. You must have done it in your open water course, right?
Yeah.
So I stopped, shut my eyes down, controlled my breathing, and I figured, okay, if I had come in, there must be a way out. So I started. I couldn't see anything. It was just pitch brown, and my light was making it worse. Even so, you couldn't see anything, right? So I just used my hands to feel the wall very calmly, because I was down to about 60 bar at that point, only one tank.
Oh my gosh.
So then I managed to get out of it, but not in the direction I came. Again, that compartment which I had turned around. So I didn't want to go back. There was a hole. I removed everything. I knew now if I go back, I don't have a chance, right? If I get stuck again.
And you had 60
So this is my only ticket out. 27 meters and 50 bar of air. Removed everything, chucked it out, and swam out of that. So yeah, so out of that whole stupid experience, the only correct thing I did was the stop, breathe, think, act. Saved my life. Yeah. So a basic thing I learned in my open water.
I think that's
That's
just
the
a
first
testament to also like how with experience you really know how to navigate out of these situations, right? Because and another reason like why you need the proper certifications and stuff to be able to do the dive, because if it was someone who is more of a beginner, they would probably not have that as like an survival instinct as well. So
and also how this like diving is a risky sport. Although people think it's just so nice to go down and like see the underwater world, it's a technique and a skill that you need to learn. So it's important to, I mean, I'm glad you shared this story so that people also understand that it's not just seeing fish underwater and exploring these wrecks, but there's also so much of a risk that you're taking.
I think main thing is don't go in. I mean, it's tempting, especially if you don't see light in. Actually, if you see light in the other end, it can be more dangerous because you feel you can get out and you go too deep. So even if you see light at the end, it could be very dangerous. Actually, that's the reason I started doing cave diving. After that experience, I realized I needed to do this. Correct? Then the reason I started cave diving is just to be able to explore shipwrecks. But after a while, the caves took over. It's another story.
Way more like scarier, I think.
It's addictive as well.
I think we should get him again for the cave diving part.
next episode.
It's a lot on cave dives.
I think you've shared a lot of valuable information with us, and like truly an underwater explorer in like the sense of it. There's like no other way to describe. Is there something like a message you can share with our listeners as to how they can play their part in protecting the ocean or protecting these shipwrecks?
Yes, for sure. I think again, from a human standpoint, people don't really relate to the shipwreck if they are not in the ocean, right? So it's kind of there's a barrier there, obviously, but I think in this day and age, everyone is concerned about the health of our planet, right? And the planet is not just Earth; it's the ocean itself. So you have to think about the ocean, and everyone has to think about the ocean because the ocean is like our lungs, right? It removes our carbon dioxide from the, right? It does, right? I don't know. I just took it off.
Yeah, it does.
But I think it does, right? It's a carbon dioxide sink.
sequestration.
So So we the media talks a lot about land-based issues like deforestation, poaching, right? Hardly anything around the ocean, but the oceans are really
Vital
important. So I
part,
think,
yeah.
exactly, right?
And they cover most of the earth, like way
Yeah,
more than
75% of
land is.
the earth, and so I think everyone should obviously focus on that and get into get into the ocean, go for a swim or snorkeling,
with it.
and you can enjoy the ocean without being a diver.
Of course.
Very simple, right? I mean, it's go to the beach, or I think snorkeling is a really great activity. It doesn't need too much skill. You just practice a bit and you are free. And so much freedom. Actually, sometimes I prefer snorkeling.
Snorkeling, yeah.
Because there are some of the shallow reefs you can't dive anyway. If you dive, it will damage the reef because it's like 5 meters, like Pigeon Island, for example, right?
Yeah.
And snorkeling is a wonderful way to explore. Like you see sharks in Trincomalee, the
Yeah.
Nilaveli. Have you seen?
In Pigeon Island.
Yeah, it's
amazing.
I think the most reliable place to see sharks, right?
It's actually what got Aindri to start diving.
Really?
Yeah. I went snorkeling there like about 10 or 15 years ago, and
Right.
then that got me into diving.
Yeah. The shark action is quite good,
Yeah.
especially in the morning. Unfortunately,
A lot
now
of black tip reef
black-tip reef
and-
sharks. Those days we were allowed to go at 7 a.m. because there was no
It wasn't
wildlife.
a protected area.
Yeah, now it's only after 8, right?
Yeah.
So if you dive, if you snorkel around 7, I've seen, this I counted, 22 sharks.
Really?
Not 400 batfish, but 22
22
black-tip
sharks.
reef sharks hunting.
Hunting.
Wow.
Yeah, at low tide they were hunting. They were going into the.
Actually, a night
Going all
dive
over
at
the place.
Pigeon Island would be amazing.
Yeah, night dive. Yeah, I've done around Pigeon Island. I have done a dive. Yeah.
Near the other
Other
reef,
end.
no? There's this
Eric's Fernando Reef or something. It's
Yeah,
named
yeah.
after Eric Fernando, one of the earlier pioneering scuba instructors.
Um,
Yeah, so connecting with the ocean is, I think I would
Yeah,
say.
and you don't have to be a diver. You can
Yeah.
obviously, like what you said, you can snorkel and
Yes.
learn so much about the ocean as well, like the fish you see, the reefs that you see, the damage we have caused, coral bleaching, all of that.
Also, I think realizing that the ocean is not this like one giant like homogeneous place. Like it also has so many different aspects to it. Like there's so
Yeah.
many different kind of fish, but there's so many different kind of ecosystems. And some of
Ecosystems,
these are shipwrecks, and
Yeah.
some of these are coral reefs, and
Yeah.
sandstone reefs, mangroves, and seagrasses, and sort of realizing how much variation and diversity is there in the ocean. I think really opens your eyes up to how beautiful it
Beautiful,
really
yeah.
is, and how it all sort of connects together. And
Do you get like anxiety when you don't dive for a long time? When you see
Kind
the
of.
ocean, like when you see the ocean
Yeah.
fat and calm,
Yeah,
I feel
I
like
do.
something is inside me, like I need to get into the ocean.
That's true. It really puts you at ease.
Yeah.
Like even after a dive, that feeling you
Yes,
have
yes,
is
yes.
just
Yeah.
amazing.
So I think we can wrap up now. Thank you so much, Dharshana,
Most
for
welcome.
everything you've shared with us today. I think it was really interesting, and we've definitely learned a lot. And thank you, everybody, for listening. We hope you found it interesting.
Bye. This podcast is a CreatorCast production.